closed chat. Good morning to everyone. I am beaming in with History Matters, and so does coffee with an extra big mug. Today we're going to be talking about language in a sense, and it was spawned by something I happened to see online yesterday morning. And there were many reasons that it intrigued me, but the one I'm going to talk about has to do with language. But before I plunge in there, I am going to turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will be explaining the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted, as always, to be with you on Fridays. The chat is already in full force. So if you are new to us, make sure that you set your chat to everyone so that everyone can see your messages. We are going to have an awesome conversation this morning. Joanne's going to talk for about 30 minutes. You can chat away all you want, but if you have questions, those have got to go in the Q&A, because around 10:30, that's where I will be looking for them, and we'll be answering your questions the second half of the hour.
Okay, and I will say two particular things. One is, and we already said it once before we were live and beaming out to everyone. Be sure if you're chatting, if you're in chat, to set the setting to everyone and not just panelists and participants or whatever the other phrase is. And also, if this is your first time here, please let us know, partly because the entire History Matters community will welcome you, because they're a community and they get to show that off if you say that you are a first-time person here. Okay. What got me going on this topic of language, and I actually, as ever, this is the 152nd straight episode. Boo, unbelievable. And now we're at the point, given the number of episodes, that whatever I decide to talk about, I have to go back now and look through the other episodes I've done. And I thought to myself last night, well, for sure, I must have talked about language before, which of course I have. And I went and listened to the episode that says something like words matter or something like that. I can't remember, but it's a different way of talking about words, luckily for me. So what I'm talking about today, I have not quite talked about in this way before. What I saw online and what kind of set me off in a variety of ways was an article that talked about a bill that was against trying to tamp down on woke investment. And I thought, of course, woke investment, meaning investment that considers environmental, social, and corporate governance, which has something to do with a bill that Biden supported. So apparently ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, and regarding retirement savings, Biden had done something to encourage that, and this bill is trying to knock that down. So of course, first I thought, yeah, because you don't want people investing to promote the good of the environment, society. It was like, okay. So my first moment of outrage was, what? But the next one was, wait, woke investment. Now, on the one hand, what they mean is obvious, which is this is investment that in one way or another, according to some people on the right, not only is it Biden related, which means in a party basis, it's not a good thing, but also woke, it's a leftist climate. There's a whole string of words you could plug in with the idea that this is woke investment. Essentially, it's promoting things the left likes and that Biden promoted, and so it must be tamped down. Some of that, as I just said, is what happens in party politics. Some of that, it has to do with one particular mode of party politics, which I think right now, the word woke, and there are a number of other words, but the word woke is at the center of it. And that is the deliberate creation of words that are almost stripped of meaning, right? And there have been in the news, and I didn't go in search of these headlines. There's been in the news, I can't remember who it was, a politician who was asked to define woke, or a lawyer on behalf of a politician to define woke and couldn't. And there's a reason for that. That's deliberate, right? The use of the word woke, it's a shorthand, it's a buzzword, it's a catchword, right? It encapsulates an us, and that's going to be part of what I'm talking about today. It encapsulates and communicates a lot with one word. So the original source, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, the original meaning at this point is kind of pointless and useless, and everything can be woke if you're angry at it in one way or another. I mean, we've had woke M&Ms, a lot of woke things that who knew. So at any rate, that's what set me off. That's what started me on this topic is woke, it struck me, was being used in similar ways in which other such words have been used in the past. And you could say this about long stretches of US history. I'm going to look at two particular moments when it's really clear, particularly when you look at newspapers and even sometimes congressional debate, letters, print in one way or another, you see people using this kind of shorthand. Picking words to use this kind of shorthand, and very much so in front of or for the public, because it's supposed to bring everybody together. Now, I want to pause for a moment or two just to talk about woke, because woke, first of all, in my research this morning, the use of woke in the way that we are to consider it, not necessarily today, but a decade ago, the idea that you're supposed to stay woke to injustice in the community, injustice against the Black community, often by the white structure of government, justice, and politics. That mode of saying stay woke against injustice against Black Americans, apparently that became mainstream-ish in 1938. Think about that. Or at least its first, let's put it this way, its first use in a mainstream forum. It becomes much more popular in the 1960s. But in 1938, there's a song by Huddie Ledbetter, who is known much better as Leadbelly. And he wrote a song about the Scottsboro Boys. And it was a group of 9 Black teenagers who were accused of raping 2 white women. And in the song, at one point, he says, stay woke. And then luckily for us in the historical community, he explained it. He said, I made this little song about down there, so I advise everybody be a little careful when they go along through there. Best stay woke. Keep their eyes open. Now that's a very specific application, but the meaning is clear, right? Keep your eyes open, stay woke, be aware of the threat, the very real threat that is just there for anyone Black who goes into that part of the country. That is what he was saying. Now, initially, it really comes to power in the 1960s, and then more recently with the Black Lives Matter community and effort. And it was, again, a sort of bonding word, a word used largely by the Black community. It was not a white used word until semi-recently. And we've watched, and I won't go into great detail here, we've watched the word go from Black usage to Black and white usage to not only, but a lot of white usage to the right usage on the right white, the white, not that they are right and white, but the white usage of people who are on the right. So we watched this word evolve because depending on who likes it and who hates it, it's going to be bonding people in a way that some or others might not be particularly pleased with. Now, you might say that a word that has been taken from Black culture and then taken by white culture and then taken by people on the right who are particularly hostile to things on the left, including diversity movements, is kind of the ultimate cultural appropriation, right? That like we take this thing that referred to be careful, stay woke in the Black community to what's happening around you. And it was taken by white Americans, and now it's taken by white Americans who, many of whom have race issues. Talk about taking, using, and appropriating and keeping a word. That word now is primarily on the right. And the important thing to note about it is that it means everything and nothing at this point. It doesn't really have a meaning. It's for good reason that when asked to define it, some people who are using that word a lot publicly can't, because the point of it at this point is not to have a specific meaning. It's far more useful without a specific meaning. It's a shorthand for the left and things we don't like about them, as far as its usage among people on the right. On the left, you might say that for some people, MAGA is being used in a similar way. We can come back to that. But for now, talking specifically about woke, that's supposed to be vague, it's supposed to be general, and it's supposed to, because it's vague, because it's general, embody a lot of things that people don't like, that people hate, that people are against. So woke becomes a community bonding thing, an emotion grinding thing, right? Woke becomes really politically useful in a way that we see every day now, in one way or another. So I want to talk a little bit about words in the past that served this function and how they were used, and then swing back around, as I always do and ever do, to the current day. Now, me being who I am, the first thing I thought of course, was the 1790s. That's a period of, actually, interestingly, I didn't think about that until this moment. I'm going to talk about the 1790s. I'm going to briefly touch on the pre-Civil War period. And I've already said that woke comes really into wide usage in the 1960s. When I've said before here that when I talk about moments of extreme divisiveness and extreme contingency in the United States, the 1790s, the 1850s, and the 1960s are the three that I mentioned before the current day. I haven't thought about that till this second, but that's interesting in and of itself, that these kinds of buzzwords, these catchwords, become really useful, really popular, and in a sense, easy to use, in addition to being important to use, at moments when there's extreme polarization, very much a sense of political warfare on an ongoing basis. And this kind of banner waving word has a real power and effectiveness. So 1790s, there were words that the Republicans and that the Federalists threw around. And when they said one of these words, it was absolutely obvious what they meant. Now, I went searching this morning for a quote that I know exists, that I know I've used at some point in the distant past, and I couldn't find it, which is really frustrating. But I could give you the essence of it, which kind of captures what I'm talking about here. And that is, it was a Federalist writing to another Federalist in a letter. And I don't think it was Theodore Sedgwick, Fisher Ames. I went searching through Federalists, like high Federalists. But what it basically said was, all you have to do is say the word aristocrat in conversation in front of the public, and you're lost. No one will listen to you, right? The public will turn from you. Aristocrat means too many things for that to be used in conversation. Just stay away from the word entirely. Again, it was said in 18th century language, but that was the meaning of it, which is why I remembered it. I even looked through my first book. I must have put it in here. Maybe it's in there. I couldn't find it. However, there were a number of words like that. That's one of the words that Republicans tended to use to lump Federalists into one big bad them. Aristocrat was one, monarchist was one, and there's obviously a specific meaning of monarchist, but if you were in 1798 and you called someone a monarchist, didn't matter if they actually wanted a monarchy for the government. It meant, ooh, you're a Federalist. It means you're all in favor of the aristocracy. It means, you want a king here. It means you're against democracy. It means you're against us. It means ... You can fill in all of the blanks. So monarchist aristocrats and British Party were tossed around as far as Federalists were concerned. I would say aristocrats and monarchists become these buzzwords that mean far more than they mean specifically. They for some Republicans, they sum up all of the things that they hate about the viewpoints of that side of the them. Now, as far as the Federalists are concerned, they would point to the Republicans and call them anarchists, which they were not anarchists, but hey, call them Jacobins, which is the most radical of groups that were formed in the wake of the French Revolution, and called them, obviously, the British Party, the French Party. But same idea. If you talk about anarchists, if you talk about Jacobins, Jacobins isn't even, I mean, that refers to French politics. Anarchists is a fear, just like in this period, if you had talked about tyranny on the part of the Federalists, that would have bundled things together too. But these are all words that have that magic appeal to them, that if you plant them in a public address, if you plant them in any kind of public-minded writing, it's like the what is it, the bat signal? What is it in Batman? I can't even remember what it is, the bat signal, and everyone goes, oh, it's like you say one of those words, and the people who already are with you go, ooh, I know that is, I could see that. I know that, I recognize that. And other people understand what's being said and then decide whether they're part of the us or the them, or whether they're still holding back. But it's very much an us signal. That's what those kinds of words do, is signal, here's a word that represents a big bundle of things that we don't like. We're not going to define anymore. We don't have to. We know who the them is. We know who the thus is. So basically, when we use that word, we're just saying them. And that's what it becomes a shorthand for. Now, interestingly, in the Civil War period, I know that there were lots of words being used, but the one that I saw when I was writing my most recent book, over my shoulder, that was used a lot, but was used on the part of the North and the South, which kind of chips away at the idea that I have here, but served the same purpose: fanatic. Each side called the other fanatics, the fanatics of the South, the fanatics of the North. And by fanatics, they were explicitly saying people who don't care about the law, people who don't care about the government, people who are willing to do anything for themselves. Again, bundle up a whole bunch of bad meanings in the word fanatic. And in this time period, both sides thought that they could advertise the other side as doing that to some degree they felt that the other side was doing that on a certain level. That was a really effective word. And I would bet, I did not do this, so it's not a bet I would place money on, but I would bet if you were rummaging around, as one does, in Civil War era newspaper writing, probably not so much in Congress, but maybe newspaper writing, like a newspaper database, you would see the word fanatic a lot. That serves the same purpose. You put it in conversation, it has an instant sort of bang appeal to it. That's the kind of language that I'm talking about, and that I'm putting woke in the context of. They're words that ultimately, they start out having a meaning. They even start out being used by the people they're ultimately used against. And watching words sort of, I guess, morph is the word, from one meaning to another meaning to another meaning, depending on the people who are using it, is interesting linguistically, right, as far as the study of rhetoric is concerned. But when it comes to politics, that just is a map of their political usage and a map of the way that the politics of the moment are unfolding. They're not supposed to have a specific meaning. That's why people who are now throwing it around probably can't define it, because they're not really supposed to be able to. It doesn't mean one thing now. It means things on the left that are promoting their kind of social justice warrior, another phrase, kind of catchphrase, agenda, and you sort of lump in everything else you want to lump in there, diversity and everything else, that like that crazy leftists doing their weird thing. Woke is now the word that sums that up. And is, now the left is not using woke anymore, because it's sort of been appropriated in that way by the right. Particularly, there are some people on the right, certainly not everyone, but some people on the right who have very explicitly been racist in their agenda. So the fact that they are using this originally Black vernacular word to fight diversity, the promotion of diversity, it's kind of a head banging against the wall kind of thing. But the larger point I want to make here, because I see we're getting close to the end of time, is that these kinds of words, they create, as I hinted at the outset, an us versus them agenda, actually an us versus them reality. They are a statement of an us. If you are an us, you understand what the word means in its full use. You're probably using it in that way. If you're a them, you're going to be angry at that word. You're going to recognize potentially that you are the one being attacked in that word. These kinds of buzzwords not only are political promotion, political rhetoric, you could say political propaganda to pull people in, they are explicitly creating a community with its own kind of language, like really creating a community. That's a function that these words use. You are in that group, you speak that language, you use the words that they're using that way, and you are in, it's the same function. In my first book, I talk about political gossip, deliberately being used as a political tool. People would collect it. I can't remember what the word was used. It wasn't harvest, but something close. They would collect gossip and then they would drop it in different places and talk to each other about the strategies that they were using. The thing about gossip was, it's only gossip if you're on the side that sees it as revealing something bad, right? So if you understand the import of gossip, you probably are part of the community that's using it. And if the piece of gossip doesn't seem particularly meaningful to you or important to you, you're probably a them, right? So gossip was another one of these things that a kind of language, a kind of partisan political language that evolved in the 1790s. And that was used in that very same way. Not new, right? So I'm actually not saying this all began in 1798. These are things that I'm sure you can trace back forever. Language serves that handy purpose, right? Language and political warfare. Language can help a lot with that in so many ways. Maybe that's another topic for another day. But at any rate, the purpose of these words is to be vague, to bundle up a lot of ideas within the one word without defining them. You shouldn't define them, and to create an us and a them that you are against. So one of the things I want to say here at the end is these words are creating as well as substantiating political warfare, right? They're part of partisan warfare. In a way, they're weapons. And as I always say, I feel like so many of our Friday morning conversations, I loop back around. And in the end, it's like, listen to what people are saying. Not only watch what they are doing, which you must, but listen to what people are saying. When you hear or see these words being used, woke investment, it's important not to just do what probably people on both sides do, which is people on one side are like, yeah, and people on the other side are like, no. It's important to look at, I wrote down here, when, who, and why, when they're being used, why they're being used, and who is using them. Because when these words are being used, there's a purpose. And whether that purpose is, here's something we hate, and this will really drum up hatred against it, or it's, there's someone vulnerable here, and we're going to try and pin this on that person. Always think about the usage, recognize these words for the buzzwords that they are, and think about the usage and think about the purpose. And as I just suggested, the purpose might be us versus them. Entirely possible that's all that's meant. But there could be more there too. It could be a particular person in a particular circumstance talking about a particular thing in which that kind of us versus them emotion, and it is emotion, has a particular meaning, really means something that works for that moment, that is powerful and useful for that moment. So that's my larger point. When I went back and looked at the last time I talked about words, I was talking about how the use of words masks some things. And I think one of the things I talked about, I think I talked on TV about it because I must have tweeted about it and somehow magically you appear on TV. I had talked about the fact that civil war was not a good phrase to use to refer to the present, partly because it has a specific meaning which does not apply to now, but it's also sort of oddly enough, sort of conversely thinking, it allows us to avoid the messiness of the current moment and just sort of encapsulate it all into this phrase that, again, almost doesn't really have a meaning. Civil war, yeah, a civil war. And what that does is prevent you from thinking, no, we're actually in a really ugly partisan moment and ... right? Where things are happening, and civil war makes that too tidy. It packages it too well. So that was how I used words before, is not to throw them around with abandon and package things in a useful way. Now, what I'm saying is, doesn't contradict that, just another version of it, a variant of it. When people are throwing around these kinds of buzzwords, always think about the strategy that might apply to that moment, the meaning that people are giving to it in that moment. It might be as simple as, we are us and we hate them. We do good things and they do bad things, but it might be more specific. There might be a specific target, a specific moment, a specific piece of legislation, a specific politician that they're hoping to sort of, dirty with their, ideally, sticking one of those buzzwords to that person and making it hard for that person to remove. So that's my larger lesson of today, as ever. And in the times we live in, I guess the reason I say this so much is it's hard to do, and I myself am just as much a victim to this as anyone else. So often, in so many ways, the natural response to things that we see and hear in the political realm is to clench your fists and be outraged. And I understand that because I do that all the time, and the number of tweets, posts, whatever the heck it is that I'm putting up online that I have written and erased is astronomical at this point, right? I get outraged, I write something. I think this morning yesterday, I even had newbie. It's gone very far if I make my bird say something that is an outrage political thing. And I was like, yeah, no, I can't say it, and newbie can't say it either, because that's just fueling the hate. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to back away. And to me, throwing that kind of extreme emotion into the political realm, you're gunning it up. You're contributing precisely what you shouldn't contribute. The most effective thing you can do when confronted with that kind of language is to be very calm in your response. Oh, really? Oh, really? Could you define that for me? There are different ways of coming back. Okay, so that's the beginning of my comments today. We'll be heading into questions shortly. Now let me explain the mug. Anyone here who is new, every week for 152 weeks, I have brought a mug or an equivalent, a near equivalent. Occasionally it was an iced coffee cup, but still, that represents something about the theme that we're talking about. And I found this mug in my cabinet. I don't think I've used it before. You'll see why, but it captured this perfectly. Okay. And I don't have my phone here. So I actually even took a picture of it when it was in full form. Let me explain this. Okay, so this is the mug, but it's one of those mugs that when you put hot water in, the image appears. And what it says on this side is Hamilton fired first. And on this side is an image of the Burr-Hamilton duel. And I don't know if NCHE is still selling it, but they were for a while. And the reason I brought that is the most buzzworthy thing in the world was dueling. Call someone a coward, call someone a liar, you got a duel. And so this, I saw it and I was like, yeah, like this is a place in which individual words have their own meaning and then a lot of other meanings enough to die for. And I put my hot water in and I made my coffee and I was like, yay, and then it disappeared. Not only that, but anywhere where I put my fingers, it began to disappear, right? Because I guess my hands were cold. And so anyway, so that's why I haven't used this before. So it is a new mug for History Matters. It's also a mug that does not work for History Matters. Maybe during the after party, I'll find, I think my phone is lurking at the other end of my coffee table so that I can show you what it really looks like.
Or you can go microwave some water and we'll have a scientific experiment live on the air.
That's right. Woo. Okay, let me open chat so that I can see what we're doing as we're having this conversation. A malfunctioning mug. No, but see, Tim says, it's functioning just as it should be.
Intended to do. Oh, Carol Lee found the link to the mug, the color changing mug on the NCHE store.
I think Matt, my partner in crime number 2, Matt, created this. I think had the idea for this. So John, I don't want to take that away from you if that was you, but I thought it was Matt who thought of it. So yes, partner in crime number 1, the first partner in crime. I as soon as I said number 2, I was like, I'm not ranking partners. So at any rate, yeah.
That's funny. Okay, we have questions. Let's go back up to the top here. Beth, our friend Beth, says, since we are talking about how words are used and misused, might we use a phrase other than partner in crime? Especially since I hate that I can do this in America today. Imagine how it might be construed against us.
Partner in crime. Wow. And it sums up so much.
Well, I think Grace and Matt were probably they aren't like, but I get in trouble a lot. Like Carol Lee will attest to the fact that I can be pretty naughty. So maybe sometimes it's more fitting for me.
In a sense, I meant it along the lines of what we've been talking about. I meant it as a cliche that suggests in a funny way that we're sort of plotting things together here.
Yeah.
But I guess that's an example, right? It can have kind of an added meaning if you want it to. I think I'm keeping partners in crime. How could I not? Because people get bingo with it all the time.
They do. But I do wonder, like, since we do have people tuning in from other parts of the world, is that phrase understood, or do they think you're being nice and giving former convicts a second chance?
Somehow I doubt that, Annie.
I've never been arrested.
Somehow that will be interesting to know, but
that is funny. Okay. Dave asks, we've been getting some financial planning advice in the chat if you haven't been able to follow along. So this kind of speaks to this. I was sharing in the chat that when I retired from K-12 and started doing this little thing that I do now at New American History, that I specifically asked the people where my retirement money goes to never invest in anything that would hurt the environment. My older sister made fun of me. She's like, oh, you're such a tree hugger. And then she and her husband, when the market took a dip last year, did terrible. And I actually did fine. And the people that manage our money were laughing. They said, please don't tell your sister this, but you're actually a better investor. And my sister was a banker. So it was kind of a family joke. Yeah.
I have to say that those are the lines along which I invest too, and it's doing pretty well.
Yeah. So that's where Dave's question comes from. He says ESG and qualified retirement plans and plan trustees and plan fiduciaries and plan participants. I get lost in all these words. The Department of Labor have long legal histories that are complex, interesting topics. Using woke in a discussion does nothing to engage in a reasonable debate. Isn't that the point of using words like aristocrat, monarchist, and woke? And then the question is, how do we engage intelligently when debate is reduced to a word such as woke?
Well, I mean, obviously one easy answer, not necessarily the best answer, but one easy answer is woke. What specifically, so that we can continue this conversation, which I'm very willing to do, what specifically do you mean when you use woke? Maybe they'll have an answer. If they have an answer, then that you can actually have a conversation. But I think highlighting in one way or another, and I don't have the magical answer to this, but highlighting in one way or another that's like a buzzword that kind of doesn't have a meaning, and that if you can't assign a meaning to it, that's how you're using it. I guess part of what wasn't necessarily underlying the topic for today, but the assumption was that a lot of people don't recognize that those words are being used in a very deliberate way for a very specific political purpose. So, number one is sort of to recognize them as that. You can't and shouldn't stop people from using words. There are words which are uncivil and out of bounds, and people can be held responsible for using those words. And there are words which become politically tainted. People are going to keep saying woke as long as it's having a good impact with the base in one way or another. But when you're responding, you can certainly point out the fact that that word, tell me what you think it means. It kind of is used so much by so many people in so many ways that at this point it doesn't really have a meaning.
Yeah, I find that CRT, we've talked about
precisely
labeling everything that they don't like or don't agree
CRT
with.
math. No, exactly.
Yeah, math. Yeah. CRT, and the other one, our governor here in Virginia started calling it divisive concepts, and then and he's not the only one. Some laws, divisive concept laws, like in Tennessee and Florida. So when you ask what is a divisive concept, or like one of our legislators said, okay, can we at least, if you're going to make a divisive concepts law, can we make a list of things that aren't divisive concepts? And he listed like the Holocaust, the Civil War, all the things they didn't want to talk about, and they weren't willing to. They wouldn't let us nail down a list because they don't want to get locked into specifying.
But think about this. Where did I just see this here? You put in, Annie, critical race theory. Here's what's interesting about that. You don't hear that as much these days, right? Now woke is wallpapered everywhere. What's interesting about that is, first, critical race theory meant everything and nothing. A lot of people stepped forward and said, no, actually, it means something specific, actually. And it's not taught here and it's not taught there, and you might whine about it, but it isn't what you think it is. And I can't say that was effective in making it less useful as a toss around word, but it might have been. It might be that there's a case of a sort of created us versus them word that got enough pushback in some way that it was slightly less effective. And then woke became the immediate replacement. I don't know. That's pulling that out of whole cloth. I have no idea. But goes back to that earlier question. One thing you can do is push back and say, like I said, what does it mean? But also, here's what it actually means. Saying, you're using the word, but doesn't seem like you really know what it is. I don't know. To push back at those words, you have to undermine their meaning and expose the fact that they are meaningless. And
Miranda pointed out that culturally responsive teaching, which has nothing to do with that other CRT, critical race theory, has been merged in with that talk. And so now, they're trying to pass laws saying you can't have culturally responsive teaching. Well, why wouldn't you want to have culturally responsive teaching? Why wouldn't you understand the backgrounds of your students? So it's just, another example.
Right.
That's been brought up in the chat. Okay, Kathy asked, would you say the word fascist and authoritarianism is now kind of getting lumped in the same category as woke?
Well, fascist, and I think, and who the heck knows? I think at some point I've talked about the fact that fascist is actually being used by both sides, because now it has taken on. It is kind of a buzzword. I try not to use it when I'm making public statements because each side accuses the other side in a way that makes it meaningless. There is a specific meaning to fascism, but if everyone says, no, you're a fascist, no, you're a fascist, then it already has been polluted enough that there has to be a more specific way of defining something that isn't using that word. I think Nazi sometimes is a shorthand for that too. I think authoritarian, I think these words, not quite along the line of being buzzwords, but these are words that are used so much, they really don't have meaning at all, right? There is a specific meaning for authoritarian, for fascist, even for Nazi. They are shorthand, but not sort of like this'll, they are very explicitly, you look up authoritarian in the dictionary and that's not what it says. right? So what they mean really, it doesn't matter, and thus everyone can accuse everyone of doing those things. But I think that is much the same impulse. And I, at some point in the past, someone's going to get bingo. On my podcast, one of the suggestions I had was, can we work our way through those words that everyone throws around and no one understands what they mean, like fascist, critical race theory? We did actually, authoritarian, and the word democracy, right? That even that word is used by all kinds of people and by people who don't explicitly really know what they mean. And in this, I mean, some people are not doing this at all maliciously. They just don't know, right? I'm partly talking about democracy all the time, not because I necessarily think everyone is against democracy, but because I think a lot of people just don't really know specifically what it is, because why would they? Right? I mean, they might not have ever paused to think about that before. Same thing. I mean, it's not as though we've grown up talking about, or at least those of us of a certain age and younger have grown up talking about fascism in a very specific way. People think of it now often stripped of its historical meaning, and so it becomes everything. But those are great examples, because I think, like woke, I would not use woke right now. I also try not to use those words, because as soon as you do, you're vulnerable to having them thrown back at you, because people don't know what they mean or won't acknowledge what they mean. And I think some of this is don't know, and some of this is don't want to know.
Yeah. And Clinton has a nice short question. It just says, who gets to define a word? I kind of love that question.
Yeah. Who gets to define a word?
When I was a kid, it was Merriam-Webster.
Oh, well,
whatever Merriam-Webster said, that was the definition. But now it's like,
no. What defines a word in a sense is us, right? I mean, because you have so many, like if you go and look up, what did I look up? I didn't look up woke this morning because that's obviously problematic. I looked something up in the dictionary. And, there's like a British dictionary, and there's an American usage dictionary, and there's old dictionaries and modern dictionaries. And there are so many dictionaries that you can look for the typical dictionary definition and say, generally speaking, here's how dictionaries define it. Or you could point to a specific one and say, this dictionary defines it as, but in the end, the meaning of a word has to do with its usage, which is how, you end up every year with new words being introduced. Is it Merriam-Webster that adds a new, oh no, it's the Oxford English Dictionary. I can't remember which one to make the point.
Put in the chat, yeah.
That every year they these words are being added, because now they're actually words because they're being used in a certain way or with a specific meaning.
So Debbie had an interesting question. She asked, are you aware of any successful efforts in the past by one side to prevent appropriation of one of the terms or words on their side? And were they successful in their attempt?
Repeat that for me.
So looking back in history, were there ever successful efforts in the past for one side to prevent someone from appropriating their word to the other side?
Interesting. I'm sure that the answer is yes, but now I'm not going to be able to think of one. Let me think for a minute. Well, okay, I actually did think of one, oddly enough. Okay, so it goes way back. Yankee Doodle. So Yankee Doodle started out as a slur by the British, referring to making fun of Americans as like fake fops, right? Like Yankee Doodle was riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Macaroni was like a fop, was like a high fashion individual. And so Yankee Doodle is making fun, Yankee meaning American. Yankee Doodle is making fun of these idiot Americans who are uncivilized and have no culture, and they stick a feather in their hat and they think, ooh, look at me, I'm stylish. And the Americans said, you know what? Yes. We are basically, we're simple, we're straightforward and Yankee. So, okay, right? The word, and then people made up new lyrics for Yankee Doodle, right? And then that really was not going to be effective in that same way anymore. That's one specific example, but it's one way in which, the people who it was being used against said, in some ways you're right. And not only that, we like it so much, we're going to add more words.
But I think what she was asking was there ever a way that they wouldn't have been able to do that, not flip it? I think the question was asking whether you would prevent someone like from stealing woke or stealing Yankee Doodle. I think that's what they meant.
Let me think about that.
We're really testing Joanne today,
I
y'all.
know, you guys always ask these questions. I don't know the answer to that. I know that just because I'm not thinking of it quickly enough, but I would say that part of the answer to that might be if a word is associated with something specific and dramatic or tragic or something, it might be that it's hard to flip the meaning because it can't be pulled away from what it actually relates to. And I can't think of an example of that right now. And if I think of one in the next 22, 12, I'm bad at math. And for the next however many minutes, I will say it. But that would be 12. Thank you, Tim. That's what I thought. And then I didn't trust myself. That would be part of my answer, would be there are some words that just flipping them in and of themselves might be seen as truly, not just outrageous, but beyond improper and nasty. And there are some things that might be off limit, but right now I'm not thinking of a specific example.
Okay. This question comes from our good friend Kathleen V. She says, might calling others haters as an opposing political party also being used now and in the past in a similar fashion to woke to ultimately just shut down any kind of constructive conversation? Like using the word haters.
Repeat that in a moment, but I wanted to pause because I did see Mike said Holocaust. And that's actually a good example, right? Is that people can try to use it in a lot of ways, but basically it has one meaning. And when people use it, they get attacked. They might continue to use it that way, and some people might like that, but you can't pull that away from what it is. And we see, in recent years, someone does something and uses that word, and it's immediately pounced on. So there's an example that sort of crosses a line that most people really understand the meaning and can really understand the import of using it. Anyway, that's a great idea. Okay, now Annie, ask me the question again.
Okay, she's asking, is it perhaps when you call people haters, you hear that term haters all the time, because they're an opposing political party, being used now or in the past in a similar way as woke to shut down a constructive conversation?
Well, for sure, haters is a them versus us kind of way of looking at things. It's also kind of a self-assurance kind of thing, right? Is that sometimes people will achieve something and then other people will attack them for achieving it. And that's very much, let the haters hate. I'm doing what I want to do. So there's that kind of a meaning to it, so that it isn't quite the same as far as, I suppose you could say it's community-ish. Newbie really doesn't like the haters. He's like helicopter bird over there. At any rate, I would say that has a similar connotation to it, but it's the us versus them part of it is a little different, if that makes sense. And I won't go into more detail because I will confuse us more than clarify things. Peeper's gonna peep, Sean. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's funny. All right, we only have one more question left. This almost never happens. This is from our good friend Richie Houston. He says, should the Republicans using woke as a disparaging word be reminded about the wide awakes of the 1850s? Does that help remind us that the party shifts over the last 150 years?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So the fact of the matter, and it's a great example. Of course, it presumes that the person you're talking to will acknowledge the existence and meaning of history, but it is true that, and this has been always true, that a political party wants to trace its past to the past it wants to have. and the use of a word can be a useful thing to do, right? So, well, there are Jeffersonian Republicans and there are Lincoln Republicans and there are Republicans today. That is not a straight line. And, the same thing for Democrats. It just doesn't work. Parties morph again, that parties change and rechange and shift and have different strategies, and people come and people go and they go away, and then a new one comes and uses the same word. You just can't draw that kind of straight line, however much people really want to. And there's a lot of, the party of Lincoln. If you go specifically to what Lincoln thought and believed and apply it to some on the right, that's really not going to work. So, and that's another example, right? Those are names that have this kind of import. But that's a good point, that if you say, no, in this party in this period did this and said this and used these words and was known for this, historically grounded, supported by evidence, facts, one would hope that for at least some people, they would see that you can't equate. Now, that said, the number of years that myself and a bunch of other historians have been on social media saying, not the same party, not the same party, right? The parties flipped in this decade. And then people say, they did not, you're making that up. It's like, well, no. And some people, I think like Kevin Cruz is particularly good at this. Let me offer you a string of evidence, actually Seth Kotler too. Let me offer you a string of evidence that supports what I'm saying. Now, some people don't really care about historical evidence or history, right? What they need is the link. And so what you're saying won't matter. But putting it out there, I think, is important. And some people are going to not be quite as loud and bellowing that, because it's very clear, that there's a meaning, that there are problems. You can't make that direct link. It's a similar thing with Hamilton, right? People like him, or for a time, it's actually changed. I hadn't thought about this. For a long time, he was kind of taken by conservatives to be like a guy who was on their side. He's like a money man, and he supported industry and corporations and blah, blah, blah. There was an assumption that if you like Hamilton, you're a conservative, which I came up against a lot because I was writing and speaking about Hamilton, and people would assume I was an us, right? I would get lumped into with groups of people that politically I really didn't agree with. And they assumed, like really assumed in a very strong way, in one case, actually giving me money because I was part of them, right? I believed I was a conservative in my politics, and they could tell because I was using Hamilton. Or on the other side, people on the left saying, I don't like your politics, Joanne. You're like, you study Hamilton. Huh? So my politics have nothing to do with it, but there's a case in which someone was claimed for political purpose. It's also a great example of the kind of flipping of usage that we've been talking about, because now I thought that when the play came out that it was going to be a weird instance when both left and right could claim him. The left could say he's an immigrant with pulled himself up by his bootstrings and made himself what he is. Immigrants, we got the job done. And on the other side, say, well, he's a founder, and he did it on his own. And at any rate, there was a little twinkling moment when that happened, and then he became, the abolitionist, leftist, whatever. He's been claimed by one side over another. But that would have been, I could not have imagined that however many decades ago when I was being, pegged as a conservative, ultra conservative in my politics because I was interested in Hamilton. That it just always seemed bonkers to me. But it's a sign of how strong these names and people and different things, not just words, become identifiers. And for me at the time, in this one particular instance, I was in a group of people and I had been given a fellowship, and they explicitly said, because you're one of us. I was so flummoxed, like I just stood there. I was in a circle of people. What would have been good to say is, well, it's interesting because when I think of Hamilton, I think of, and I could have gone off like big government, for example. Like I could have gone off some of the things that Hamilton liked that don't fit conservative politics, generally speaking. But that was not the moment to do that. And to be honest, I just was floored. I was floored that that was the case, and I was floored that they said that openly. Anyway, I'm sure it happens on all sides. In this case, it's not just a one-side thing, like you're one of us and we're going to support you, and then the person isn't a one of us. But that was just a screamingly incorrect one of us.
Okay, we had a late breaking question from Dave. This will probably be our last one.
Before we go on, let me mention one thing, because Tim just mentioned Hamilton as a conservative. Stephen Knott, Knott, wrote a great book on the changing image of Hamilton over time, which I highly recommend. And it's floating around here. I'm so bad with titles. I want to say it's something like the Hamilton image in the American mind or something like that. Highly recommend it. He does a great job of tracking how it's changed in meaning over time. Okay, now I'll stop.
I'm writing down this Stephen Knott, Knott.
Knott.
Okay. All right, and someone's going to put persistence.
Thank you, Tim. Alexander Hamilton and the persistence
of
Linkmeister. Yes.
Yeah. And Tim's computer was blowing up twice during the beginning of the talk. He had to keep turning it off. The fan kept running, and then we were a little worried that he was going to have a combustion there. Okay, Dave gets the last word today, friends. He says, isn't Dr. Anderson's book The Second making the point that guns, self-defense, etc., meant one thing for white Americans and tragically the opposite for people of color?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, yeah, it's a great point. Is that, I've been talking mostly about politics and how politics divides things, but there are any number of ways in which a word, an idea, a person is going to have one meaning for one race, one group, one whatever, and very different for another. And there are certainly many words and many ideas that, because of ongoing injustice against Black Americans and Americans of color, words are going to have a really different meaning, or actions, or historical moments, right, are going to have a different meaning because it's a community that has a particular connection with that thing, that meaning, that, so yeah, I think it's not racist to say that different races might have different reactions to different things because of their personal connection with those things. That's we all are a product of our past, right? And we are who we are. We connect with certain communities, Hungarian, Jewish, whatever. And I'm gonna my antenna are going to be on alert in a different way for those things that relate to those things than someone else's might be.
Yep, we finished all the questions.
Okay, but look at that. It's exactly
right.
Exactly time. Okay, so let me explain what's happening next. Okay, so now we are at the point where we are shifting to the after party. What that means is we will no longer be recording what we're doing so that we can be even freer and easier in what we are saying. And we can talk about anything we want to talk about during the after party. If you are beaming in from Facebook, I say beaming in all the time, and that's like Star Trek. At any rate, if you are beaming in from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook to join the after party. You need to go to ncheteach.org/conversations, ncheteach.org/conversations, to that URL, and you can enter. It's not like you have to do anything magical. Just go there and someone's going to get bingo. Poof, you will be in the after party. So if you are coming, I love the fact that, bingo 4 and 5. I really got to change up my words. At any rate, and if there's anyone here for the first time who doesn't know this, people play bingo based on what I say. And yes, I could predict some of the words I'm going to say, but at any rate, I do want to thank you all as ever for coming, for being here, for being part of the conversation of democracy, for being part of a community that every week highlights things that we have to think about and be aware of in this moment, because they are potentially dangerous and certainly are going to have some kind of an impact. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the wonderful community that you are, and for creating the History Matters community. And thank you, John and Annie, for creating the History Matters community along with me. I'm thankful for you guys. And you guys are like, if someone didn't get blackout bingo, I feel like oddly proud.
I think Miriam was 3 away. Hey, before we log
okay.
off, I hope, John, I'm not breaking any NCHE rules, but I did want to, I put in a link to a tweet that explains next week is Civic Learning Week, which is kind of cool for the teachers. And so we're hosting a virtual screening event that's totally free on Wednesday evening. We're going to show probably my favorite episode of The Future of America's Past because it takes place here in Virginia. And it's the story of Barbara Johns, a young 15-year-old girl who led the Moton School walkout. And it's only a 27-minute long video. And then we're going to have a discussion with our friends from the Moton Museum. And so if anybody from History Matters would like to come, you have to register to get the Zoom link so we don't get trolls. But we want teachers and students and parents and History Matters history lovers like you to join us on Wednesday. It'll be 7 to 8 p.m. On Zoom, and it's going to be really fun. So I hope some of you will join us too. But there's a lot of stuff going on next week. So Civic Learning Week is a hashtag. And if you follow it, there's tons of events.
That is excellent to know. I also want to particularly thank Marjorie, because you said you needed a reasoned response to woke, and the fact that we are the reasoned response community. Exactly. That makes my heart happy, because that is what I hope to do, is just to have a place here where we can have a discussion, and I'm not ranting. I'm explaining and am open to conversation. So thank you, Marjorie, for making me happy. Okay, so a reasoned response community. We have so many mug possibilities. At any rate, I hope everyone will have a wonderful week. I'm glad now that I know what next week is, Annie, because maybe that will help me think of a topic before Thursday. I don't know. But at any rate, thank you all for coming. And for those of you who are going away, indeed, have a wonderful week. I hopefully will see you here on Friday again. And for those of you sticking around, wait for a moment and we will be in the after party.